Humiliated at an elite auction, artist Maya watched her entire life stolen by a ruthless collector. She accidentally drenched a formidable stranger's pristine suit. Yet, the enigmatic billionaire didn't rage. Instead, the notorious Mafia boss exposed her tormentor's empire, then shockingly claimed her as his own. Was this salvation, or a beautiful, terrifying trap? The scent of linseed oil and turpentine clung to Maya like a second skin, a bitter perfume of ambition and poverty. It permeated her threadbare sweaters, settled in the strands of her dark, unbound hair, and lingered in the air of her cramped studio apartment like a silent, mournful lament. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak morning light that dared to pierce the grime of her single window, illuminating the chaos of her existence. Forgotten coffee mugs rimmed with dried-up dreams, discarded sketches crumpled like broken promises, and stacks of unopened bills that threatened to swallow the last vestiges of her hope whole. She traced the faint outline of a half-finished portrait on an easel, her fingers aching with the phantom ache of brushes that yearned for paint. Her own creations, born from a desperate, fervent need to translate the world's quiet beauties onto canvas, lay mostly forgotten, leaning against walls like shy, neglected children. Each piece was a testament to a talent she couldn't afford to nurture, a whisper of a life she couldn't grasp. The grim reality was that artistry, for Maya, was a luxury she'd never truly possessed, a stolen moment between shifts, a clandestine act performed under the harsh glare of a single bare bulb. 2 years. 2 years since her father, Elias Vance, a man whose charm could disarm a dragon and whose recklessness could burn down a kingdom, had vanished from her life, leaving behind not a fortune, but a chasm of debt. A charismatic art dealer, Elias had always lived on the precipice, his infectious laughter masking a gambler's heart and a penchant for risky, shadowy dealings. Maya had loved him fiercely, had adored his stories and his boundless, albeit often misplaced, optimism. But love, she had learned, rarely paid the rent. Or in her case, the escalating interest on a monstrous loan to Victor Thorne. The name itself was a cold, sharp blade, always poised at her throat. Thorne. A collector of art, yes, but more accurately, a collector of souls. His reputation preceded him like a foul stench in every hushed corner of the art world, a ruthless, influential figure who didn't merely buy pieces, he acquired destinies. Maya could still feel the phantom weight of the contract in her hands, its thick, expensive paper a cruel mockery of her father's signature. All remaining assets, including intellectual property and services. The phrase had clawed at her, a legal trap more binding than any physical chain. It meant Thorne didn't just want her father's money, he wanted her. Her talent, her future, her very being, to be bent to his will, to paint for him, to exist as merely another prize acquisition in his dark, sprawling collection. The thought sent a shiver of revulsion through her, coiling in her stomach like a venomous snake. She pushed away from the easel, her gaze drawn to the one object that offered a fragile lifeline, Whisper of Elysium. It stood shrouded beneath a dust sheet in the corner, a secret treasure, her last, desperate gamble. Her father had discovered it years ago, a forgotten masterpiece, its colors dulled, its story obscured by time and neglect. Maya had spent months, late into the night, restoring it. Every careful stroke, every delicate application of solvent, every precise repigmentation had been a prayer, a silent plea for freedom. She knew its true value, a potential salvation. It was the purest embodiment of her skill, a piece reborn under her touch, and it carried the crushing weight of her entire future. Tonight was the night it would be unveiled at the Crimson Canvas auction, an event whispered about in elite circles, where the true power players of New York's art scene and its underworld gathered to trade in beauty and secrets. It was her only hope, the one slender thread pulling her from the abyss of Thorne's clutches. The idea of attending, of stepping into that glittering, dangerous world where she was nothing more than a desperate supplicant, made her stomach churn. She pictured herself, alone, frayed thread amidst a tapestry of opulence, her worn shoes scuffing the marble floors. The humiliation was a premonition, a dull ache in her chest. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the scent of her own desperation mixing with the lingering oils. If Whisper of Elysium failed to fetch a price high enough, if Thorne somehow found a way to sabotage her, then the abyss would open wide, and she would fall, swallowed by a life she refused to imagine. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her finest and only clean dress, a simple dark navy affair, modest to a fault. It would be her armor. Tonight she would fight. She had to. She just didn't know yet that the fight she was walking into wasn't against Thorne alone, but against a destiny far more formidable, cloaked in power and a gaze as cold and unyielding as steel. The air inside the crimson canvas auction house hung heavy with the scent of old money and newly polished marble, a potent blend of anticipation and veiled avarice. Maya stepped across the threshold, feeling instantly like a stray leaf blown into a gilded cage. Her simple navy dress, painstakingly ironed, felt like a peasant's frock amidst the rustling silks and custom-tailored suits that floated around her. The whispers of the wealthy, a low, constant hum, seemed to mock her worn shoes and the faint, persistent smell of turpentine that clung to her. Each chandelier, blazing with 1,000 facets of light, felt like a judgmental eye, reflecting her desperation back at her. She hugged her worn clutch closer, its thin strap digging into her palm. Her eyes, usually so sharp and observant, darted nervously across the faces of the collectors and connoisseurs, each one a potential savior or a potential predator. This wasn't her world. This was a realm of power players, where fortunes were whispered into existence and destinies were altered with a flick of a wrist. The cold, sterile beauty of the place, from the hushed reverence around a gleaming sculpture to the almost reverent silence when a bidding lot was called, was suffocating. Every breath Maya took felt thin, stolen. Her gaze finally fell upon the elevated dais, where Whisper of Elysium was destined to stand. A fragile hope, brittle as dried paint, flickered in her chest. If it truly sold for enough, she could escape. The thought was a tiny, desperate prayer. She tried to blend into the periphery, becoming as invisible as possible, a skill honed by years of struggling in a city that rarely noticed the small or the struggling. But the sheer press of bodies, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, pushed her inevitably closer to the main thoroughfare. A young waiter, his face pale with stress, navigated the dense crowd, a tray laden with champagne flutes balanced precariously in his trembling hands. His eyes, wide with panic, met Maya's for a fleeting second, a shared moment of sympathetic terror, before someone jostled his elbow from behind. Time seemed to fracture. The tray tilted, a constellation of crystal glasses arced through the air, glittering under the chandeliers. Maya gasped, instinctually trying to catch one, but it was too late. A wave of golden liquid cascaded down, a glittering, sickening arc. And then a dull, wet splat. The champagne didn't land on the marble, or on a less important guest. It landed, with a horrific, splashy precision, directly onto the immaculate white tuxedo of a man who stood at the center of a small, almost reverent clearing in the crowd. The space around him had seemed to ripple with an invisible force field, a palpable aura of command that even the most oblivious socialite dared not breach. Silence fell, thick and immediate, like a shroud. The hum of conversations died. The clinking of glasses ceased. Every single eye in the vast, glittering hall pivoted, not to the clumsy waiter, but to the man now stained with champagne. Maya's breath hitched. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The man was Dante Volkov. She had only seen pictures, chilling, almost mythic photographs in exclusive art magazines that whispered about his unparalleled influence and his shadowy connections. But no photograph could capture the raw, untamed power that radiated from him, the sheer, undeniable presence that seemed to bend the very air around him to his will. He was not conventionally handsome in a soft, appealing way. He was carved, sculpted from granite and danger. Mid-30s, perhaps, with hair as dark as midnight pulled back from a stark, aristocratic forehead. His jawline was sharp enough to cut, his lips a thin, unreadable line. But it was his eyes that held her captive, two chips of cold, polished steel that seemed to absorb all light, all sound, all defiance. They were fixed, not on the ruined tuxedo, but on Maya. A burning flush crept up her neck, staining her cheeks crimson. Humiliation, hot and utterly devastating, seized her. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole, to vanish into the intricate patterns of the Persian rug. The silence stretched, excruciating, amplifying the frantic pounding of her own blood in her ears. She could feel the stares of hundreds, a collective, silent judgment, branding her with the scarlet letter of her clumsiness. Dante Volkov didn't move a muscle. He simply stood there, perfectly composed, the champagne slowly dripping from the fine white fabric of his jacket. There was no anger, no theatrical outrage, no muttered curse. Just that gaze. An intense, unnerving, all-consuming gaze that stripped away her invisible cloak and pinned her, naked and vulnerable, under his absolute scrutiny. It wasn't the look of a man who cared about a ruined suit. It was the look of a predator who had just spotted its prey. Then a subtle shift. His hand, long and elegant, moved with deliberate slowness. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat, the one unmarred by the champagne. He extracted a crisp, folded $100 bill, almost new, and extended it to the trembling waiter without even glancing at him. The gesture was dismissive, an act of sheer, casual power. Cleanness, his low voice rumbled, a sound like gravel rolling over stone, but imbued with an authority that left no room for doubt or hesitation. It wasn't a question. It was an order, a command that settled over the room like a sudden, oppressive weight. Before Maya could even process the exchange, a figure detached itself from the shadows near Dante, moving with the silent efficiency of a trained phantom. A tall, imposing bodyguard, dressed in a sleek black suit, appeared at Maya's side. He held a designer garment bag, heavy with the weight of expensive fabric. He opened it, revealing a gown, a cascade of midnight blue silk, simple in cut but radiating an undeniable elegance, utterly unlike anything Maya had ever owned or even touched. Dante's steel gaze never left Maya's. His voice, still low, still unhurried, cut through the suffocating silence. Change. It wasn't a request. It was an instruction, absolute and unyielding. The sheer audacity, the effortless display of wealth and control, stole the air from Maya's lungs. He hadn't asked for her name, hadn't offered an apology for his man's clumsiness, hadn't acknowledged her humiliation. He had simply assessed the situation, issued a command, and provided the means for its execution. He had claimed the space, the moment, and by extension her. Her mind reeled. Who was this man? What kind of power did he wield that allowed him to command strangers to simply conjure designer dresses out of thin air? A cold dread, mingled with a strange, undeniable fascination, seeped into her bones. She clutched the garment bag, the silk fabric feeling cool and alien against her trembling fingers. She wanted to argue, to scream, to throw the dress back at him and demand her invisible life returned. But the words died in her throat, strangled by the sheer, unblinking intensity of his gaze. It felt as if he was not merely looking at her, but seeing through her, peeling back layers of her soul, claiming something she hadn't even realized she possessed. She turned, clutching the dress, her legs feeling like lead. As she walked towards the discreet door the bodyguard indicated, she could still feel his eyes on her back, a tangible, burning weight. He hadn't touched her, yet she felt utterly, irrevocably branded. This wasn't just a spilled drink. This was an encounter that had shifted the very axis of her desperate little world. And she had a terrifying, inescapable premonition that this man, Dante Volkov, was far from finished with her. The silk dress felt alien against Maya's skin, a luxurious shroud rather than an offering of grace. Its midnight blue shimmered with an expensive depth, a stark contrast to the churning anxiety in her stomach. Every movement felt self-conscious, as if the fabric itself was judging her, screaming to the world that she didn't belong. Yet, a part of her, a tiny, defiant ember, clung to the strange power it conferred. It was an illusion, she knew, but in this world of illusions, perhaps it could offer a momentary shield. She returned to the main hall, her eyes instinctively scanning for Dante Volkov. He was there, of course, a dark, immovable presence near the front, his profile as sharp and unyielding as polished obsidian. His gaze, however, wasn't on her. Or if it was an impersonal sweep, making her feel both relief and a strange, unexpected pang of insignificance. The air thrummed with a renewed intensity. The auction for the high-value pieces was about to begin. Maya's breath hitched to the spotlight, stark and clinical, illuminated the elevated dais. There, beneath the oppressive glare, stood Whisper of Elysium. It was breathtaking. Her hands, her heart, her very soul had been poured into its restoration. The canvas, vibrant once more, depicted a forest bathed in ethereal light, figures of nymphs and dryads swirling in a dance of timeless beauty. It was her father's greatest find, and now her last chance. A fragile, desperate hope bloomed in her chest, pushing against the fear. This painting had to save her. It simply had to. The auctioneer, a man with a booming voice and eyes that shrewdly assessed every potential bidder, began his spiel. The bid started, swift and confident, a rapid-fire exchange of millions. Maya watched, mesmerized and terrified, as the numbers climbed, each increase a tiny reprieve, a whisper of freedom. Her mind raced, calculating. Would it be enough? Could it truly be enough to erase the monster of her father's debt? Then, a ripple moved through the impeccably dressed crowd, a collective shift of attention that felt ominous. A figure detached itself from the shadows near the back, moving with a languid, self-satisfied grace. Victor Thorne. He was exactly as Maya remembered him from the few dreaded encounters at her father's studio. Tall, impeccably tailored in a dark suit that seemed to absorb the light, with hair slicked back from a forehead that always seemed creased with a calculating intelligence. But tonight, his presence was amplified, exuding an almost predatory smugness. His lips curved into a sneer that never quite reached his cold, depthless eyes as he made his way towards the bidding floor. A chill, cold as a tombstone, snaked its way up Maya's spine. Thorne raised his hand, a casual, almost bored gesture. 5 million. A gasp rippled through the room. The previous bid had been just under 3. Maya's heart leaped. 5 million. Could it be? But a flicker of unease, sharp and cold, pricked at her. This wasn't Thorne's usual game. He was a shark, but a subtle one. This was too public, too theatrical. Going once, going twice. The auctioneer stammered, clearly surprised. 10 million, Thorne drawled, his voice cutting through the tension, laced with an almost mocking amusement. This time, the gasps were louder, a collective murmur of astonishment. $10 million for a single painting, even a rediscovered masterpiece, was a phenomenal sum. Maya felt a dizzying surge of relief, almost nausea. 10 million. It was more than enough. She was safe. A tear pricked at the corner of her eye, a fragile bubble of joy. But Thorne wasn't finished. He let the number hang in the air, allowing the whispers to swell, before stepping forward. He held a thick, yellow document in his hand, its edges brittle with age. He raised it, not to the auctioneer, but to the room, to Maya. While the Whisper of Elysium is indeed a lovely piece, Thorne began, his voice dripping with condescension, my interest tonight extends beyond mere paint on canvas. He smiled, a slow, venomous curl of his lips, his eyes locking onto Maya's. You see, this young lady's late father, Elias Vance, had certain obligations to me. Obligations he, unfortunately, left to his dear daughter. A hush, heavier than the previous silence, descended upon the room. People exchanged bewildered glances. Maya's fragile hope shattered, fragments of glass tearing at her chest. No, this couldn't be happening. Thorne dramatically unfurled the document. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a legally binding contract. A contract that stipulates, upon the untimely demise of Mr. Vance and the failure to repay his considerable debts, all remaining assets, including intellectual property and services of his heir, Ms. Maya Vance, become mine as collateral. His gaze, triumphant and chilling, pierced Maya. So while I bid 10 million for the painting, that bid is merely a testament to the fact that I value my other acquisition even more highly. The room erupted in a furious buzz, a tempest of whispers and shocked exclamations. Maya felt as if a physical blow had struck her. Her face burned, a humiliating flush that spread from her chest to her hairline. Intellectual property and services. The words echoed in her mind, a monstrous distortion of her artistic dreams. He wasn't just claiming her father's debt, he was claiming her. No. Maya cried out, her voice raw, desperate, cutting through the din. She started to push through the crowd, her hands trembling. That's not legal. That's coercion. I didn't sign that. My father wouldn't. The auctioneer, pale and sweating, held up his hands, trying to restore order. Mr. Thorne, this is highly unorthodox. Unorthodox, perhaps, but entirely within the bounds of the law, I assure you. Thorne interjected smoothly, his voice laced with venomous charm. He flashed a document, a court seal visible, to the auctioneer. A Las Vegas judge quite a few months ago already verified its validity. It has been dormant, awaiting the opportune moment. He looked at Maya, his smile widening into a leer. And tonight, Ms. Vance, is that moment. Maya stumbled, her legs threatening to give way. She looked around, pleading with her eyes at the faces of the wealthy, the powerful. She tried to catch the eye of a stern-faced woman who looked like a lawyer, a man who had seemed sympathetic earlier. But every gaze met hers briefly, then flinched away. No one, absolutely no one, dared to challenge Victor Thorne. His reputation, his influence, was a suffocating blanket that snuffed out any flicker of assistance. The auctioneer, defeated, cleared his throat. Given the legal documentation presented by Mr. Thorne and the terms outlined in said contract, I am afraid we must pause the auction of Whisper of Elysium, pending further legal review of Ms. Vance's obligations. His voice was apologetic, but his eyes were filled with fear. Maya felt her world collapse. The walls of the auction house seemed to close in, the glittering chandeliers transforming into predatory eyes, thorns sneer a gaping maw ready to swallow her whole. The silk dress, once a flimsy shield, now felt like a ceremonial garment for her own sacrifice. She was trapped, utterly, completely, and sickeningly alone. The cold steel gaze of Dante Volkov, somewhere in the distance, offered no comfort, no hint of intervention. He was a storm cloud on the horizon, but she was already drowning. Thorne stepped closer, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper meant only for her, yet audible in the stunned silence. You see, Maya, I don't just collect art. I collect artists. And you, my dear, are about to become my most cherished acquisition. He reached out, his gloved finger tracing the line of her jaw, a possessive, violating touch that made her skin crawl. Welcome to your new life. Maya recoiled, revulsion and terror battling with a searing, helpless anger. Her breath caught in her throat. She was humiliated, exposed, and utterly doomed. She was nothing more than a pawn, her talent, her future, her very self forfeited. And no one would lift a finger to save her. Her eyes, wide and brimming with unshed tears, scanned the room one last time, a desperate plea for a miracle. But the faces were averted, the silence deafening. Except for one. In the distance, Dante Volkov's gaze, as cold and unyielding as ever, was fixed intently on her, a strange, calculating flicker deep within their depths. A flicker that promised not indifference, but a storm waiting to be unleashed. The air crackled with a tension that was not just Maya's fear, but something darker, more powerful, brewing in the shadows. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her fate tonight was far from over. The opulent alcove, moments ago a refuge from the glittering chaos, had transformed into a claustrophobic trap. Victor Thorne's fingers, cold and predatory, clamped around Maya's wrist, his grip surprisingly strong, almost bruising. His eyes, glinting with malicious triumph, devoured her. Foolish girl, he purred, his voice a low, venomous hiss that seemed to curdle the very air. Did you truly believe a little pain could save you? His thumb stroked the sensitive skin of her inner wrist, a possessive, violating touch that made her stomach clench with revulsion. You're mine now. Every canvas, every idea, every breath you take will be for my collection. Maya yanked her arm, but his hold was unyielding. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced through her dwindling defiance. She was chattel, a trophy to be displayed, her talent extinguished, her future dictated by this cruel, calculating man. The humiliation was a raw, burning wound. Her mind raced, desperately searching for an escape, a loophole, anything, but her thoughts were a panicked tangle of smoke and ash. Despair, thick and suffocating, threatened to consume her whole. Just as the last vestiges of hope began to crumble, a sudden shift in the air, a ripple of quiet power, made Thorne's smile falter. His eyes, still fixed on Maya, flickered with a brief, almost imperceptible annoyance. A presence had entered the alcove, not with a flourish, but with the quiet, undeniable gravity of a collapsing star. Dante Volkov. He moved with the silent, predatory grace of a jungle cat, his form seeming to materialize from the shadows themselves. His white tuxedo, now replaced by an even more impeccably tailored dark suit, seemed to absorb the dim light of the alcove, making him appear both imposing and utterly enigmatic. His steel-gray eyes, devoid of any discernible emotion, were fixed on Thorne, a silent, chilling judgment in their depths. Before Thorne could utter a word, a phalanx of figures, previously unseen, materialized behind Dante. His bodyguards. 6, perhaps 8 men, moving with synchronized efficiency, their dark suits and cold expressions a stark contrast to Thorne's bewildered, now outnumbered security detail. The atmosphere crackled, thick with unspoken threats. Thorne's confident sneer wavered, replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise, then a slow, dawning apprehension. Dante didn't speak a single word of threat. He didn't need to. His presence, his quiet command, was a threat in itself. A thick, leather-bound folder, the kind that held secrets capable of destroying empires, was smoothly placed into his outstretched hand by one of his men. The crisp rustle of paper was the only sound in the suffocating silence. Dante opened the folder with deliberate slowness, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. His gaze, still fixed on Thorne, held an unnerving stillness. Then, with a cold, almost detached efficiency, he reached to his lapel, where a tiny, almost invisible microphone was affixed. A soft click echoed, impossibly loud in the tense silence. Ladies and gentlemen, Dante's voice, low and resonant, suddenly filled the entire auction hall, amplified by unseen speakers. It was calm, unhurried, yet it commanded absolute attention. While we appreciate Mr. Thorne's enthusiasm for acquiring art, it has come to my attention, and I believe to the attention of several international authorities, that Mr. Thorne's collection practices extend far beyond the ethical. A collective gasp, then a furious buzz, erupted from the main hall. Maya stared at Dante, utterly bewildered. What was he doing? Thorne's face, a moment ago arrogant, now contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock and fury. Dante continued, his voice unwavering, a chilling cadence in the sudden uproar. It seems Mr. Thorne has quite an impressive talent for reproducing masterpieces. His highly sophisticated art forgery ring, operating under the guise of his legitimate dealerships, has defrauded collectors and institutions worldwide for decades. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. We have provided irrefutable evidence of these activities, complete with authenticated provenance of the forged pieces, to Interpol and the FBI moments ago. The main hall was now a cacophony of shouts, gasps, and frantic whispers. Thorne spluttered, his face a mottled shade of red, pure panic in his eyes. You can't. This is slander. I'll sue you to oblivion. Dante merely raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something cold and ruthless in his eyes. You'll be too busy, Mr. Thorne. Besides, he continued, his voice dropping to a silken, deadly purr, I'm afraid your ability to sue has just been curtailed. With a swift, elegant motion, Dante slid a pristine, new legal document across a nearby marble-top table. It was thick, substantial, brimming with official seals and signatures. His finger tapped a precise paragraph. Effective immediately, through a series of preemptive, legally executed acquisitions, my holding company has acquired controlling interest in all of your assets. Your galleries, your dealerships, your offshore accounts. And yes, his gaze sharpened, impaling Thorne, all your outstanding debts, including, he paused, allowing his eyes to sweep back to Maya, that particular archaic contract regarding Ms. Vance. Thorne stared, his jaw slack, his face paling to an ashen gray. His empire, built on deceit and predation, was crumbling before his eyes, reduced to dust by a few strokes of Dante's pen. He staggered back, grasping at the air as if trying to catch the pieces of his shattered world. No. This is impossible. Your contract is null and void, Mr. Thorne, Dante stated, his voice a low growl, devoid of any warmth. You no longer own anything. Not even the air you breathe in this city. The finality in his tone was absolute chilling. Thorne, utterly broken, his bodyguards now melting away like snow, collapsed into a nearby chair, defeated. Dante then turned, his full attention now on Maya. His eyes, those depthless pools of steel, locked onto hers. He reached out, his long fingers closing around her trembling hand, his thumb gently, possessively, brushing the frantic pulse point at her wrist. The touch, unexpected and intimate, sent a jolt through her, a strange mix of fear and an unsettling, undeniable magnetism. His voice, no longer amplified, was a low rumble meant only for her, yet it carried an authority that resonated through every fiber of her being. But then, with a subtle shift of his weight, he projected it, making sure his words would carry through the stunned, murmuring hall. She is mine. The words landed like a thunderclap, echoing in the stunned silence that had once again descended upon the room. Her talent. Her future. Her. He didn't say I saved her. He said she is mine. It wasn't a declaration of rescue, but a public, undeniable claim of possession. Maya's mind reeled. She was utterly disoriented. She had been rescued, yes, pulled from Thorne's terrifying grasp, but only to be immediately caught in Dante's even more formidable web. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but was now laced with a profound confusion. She was no longer Thorne's property, but she was, unequivocally, Dante's. The sheer audacity, the ruthless efficiency of his power, was both terrifying and, in a twisted, primal way, strangely compelling. Before she could form a coherent thought, Dante's grip on her hand tightened, a silent command. He turned, pulling her gently but firmly through the still stunned crowd. His men, moving with synchronized precision, cleared a path, their silent vigilance a stark contrast to the buzzing whispers that followed them. Maya felt like a doll, a prized possession, being escorted by its powerful owner. She wanted to resist, to demand answers, to scream her name was Maya Vance, not some object to be claimed. But her legs moved on their own, a numb, obedient response to his silent command. They didn't stop until they reached a sleek, black armored car waiting discreetly at the curb. The door opened as if by magic, revealing an interior of plush leather and dim, ambient lighting. Dante guided her inside, his hands still warm around her wrist. The door shut with a soft, expensive thud, sealing her away from the chaotic whispers, from the crumbling empire of Victor Thorne, and from the life she had known just moments before. As the car pulled away, gliding silently through the city streets, Maya stared out the tinted window, the neon lights of Manhattan blurring into streaks of abstract color. She was safe from Thorne. That much was undeniable. But the icy grip of his fear had only been replaced by a different kind of terror, a more profound, unsettling one. She was in the car with Dante Volkov, the shadow broker, the Mafia boss who had just dismantled an empire with a flick of his wrist and claimed her as his prize. And he hadn't said a single word about letting her go. The car hummed, carrying her to an unknown destination, a gilded cage awaiting its new, unwilling occupant. Maya clutched her hands together, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was saved, yes, but at what cost? And what exactly did mine mean to a man like Dante Volkov? The answer she knew would be far more complex and far more dangerous than she could ever imagine. The ascent in Dante Volkov's private elevator had been silent, unnervingly smooth, swallowing the chaos of the auction house whole. When the doors whispered open, Maya stepped into a world that redefined opulence. His penthouse wasn't merely large. It was a sprawling, glass-encased kingdom suspended above the glittering sprawl of Manhattan. Walls of glass offered a dizzying, panoramic vista of the city, a constellation of lights that seemed to mock her own insignificance. Polished marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting, reflecting abstract art pieces that could buy her old studio 100 times over. Servants, moving with ghost-like efficiency, were already bustling, anticipating every unspoken need, yet their eyes carefully avoided hers, a silent testament to her ambiguous status. Yet, despite the breathtaking luxury, a suffocating sense of imprisonment immediately pressed in on Maya. This wasn't a home. It was a gilded cage, albeit one crafted with exquisite, terrifying precision. Every plush sofa, every priceless artifact, every gleaming surface screamed of Dante's absolute control, a constant, chilling reminder that she was here not by choice, but by decree. Her stomach churned with a toxic mix of fear and indignation. She was no longer just debt-ridden, she was claimed. Her initial defiance was a desperate, almost primal roar trapped within her. When a housekeeper, a petite woman with kind eyes but a tightly buttoned uniform, offered her a selection of designer clothes, Maya shook her head, clutching the midnight blue silk dress she still wore. "I want my own clothes," she stated, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "And I want to leave." The housekeeper merely offered a polite, regretful smile. "Mr. Volkov is attending to matters, Miss Vance. He will see you shortly." The words were soft, yet held the weight of an unbreakable barrier. Maya tried the door, of course. It was locked, heavy, and impenetrable, a silent, unyielding sentinel guarding her new reality. The windows, vast and inviting, offered no escape, only a dizzying plummet to the teeming city below. She was truly, completely trapped. Hours bled into an agonizing eternity. Maya paced the perimeter of her luxurious prison, her mind a whirlwind of frantic thoughts. What did he want? Why me? Was this truly better than Thorne? The answer, sharp and cold, was that it was simply different. Thorne had wanted to crush her spirit and exploit her talent. Dante wanted her. The possessiveness in his gaze at the auction, the chilling finality of his "she is mine," echoed in her ears, making her skin prickle. When Dante finally appeared, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks that seemed to match the furious churn in Maya's gut. He walked into the living area, where she sat rigidly on a cream leather sofa, with the casual, undisputed authority of a king entering his throne room. He shed his jacket, loosening his tie, a subtle concession to comfort that somehow made him seem even more formidable. His eyes, those piercing steel-gray depths, swept over her, a brief, assessing glance that settled on her defiant posture. "You changed," he observed, his voice a low rumble, devoid of question or emotion. He gestured to the silk dress she still wore. It was given to me, Maya retorted, her voice sharper than she intended. Unlike my choices, which seemed to have been acquired, a flicker of something, amusement, approval, crossed his features too quick for her to decipher. He walked to a sleek, minimalist bar, pouring himself a drink she suspected was expensive scotch. You will find, he said without looking at her, that my acquisitions are well cared for. I'm not an acquisition, she spat, pushing herself off the sofa. I am a person. A free person. He finally turned, his gaze pinning her. Freedom, Miss Vance, is a luxury few can truly afford, especially those burdened by debts and hunted by vultures. His voice hardened imperceptibly. You are on the precipice. I merely ensured you landed in my hands, not theirs. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. There are rules. You will not leave the penthouse without an escort. You will not communicate with anyone outside these walls without my explicit permission. You will not attempt to escape. He paused, and for a terrifying moment, Maya thought he would elaborate on the consequences. But he simply stated, these are for your safety. Her anger flared. My safety? Or your control? Both, I imagine. His candor was disarming, chilling. He set his glass down. However, I recognize your passion. He gestured towards a discreet, unmarked door she hadn't noticed before. Beyond that door, you will find a studio, fully equipped. The finest materials. Anything you need to paint, to create. It is yours, for your use. Maya stared, dumbfounded. The sheer audacity. He was simultaneously caging her and offering her the very essence of her soul's desire. Hesitantly, she walked towards the door, her hand trembling as she touched the cool, smooth metal. She pushed it open, and a gasp escaped her lips. It was magnificent. A vast, light-filled space with soaring ceilings, and another wall of glass overlooking the city. Easels of every size, shelves brimming with every conceivable shade of paint, brushes in every shape, an array of canvases, blank and pristine, waiting to be brought to life. There was even a restoration table, bathed in adjustable light, complete with specialized tools she'd only ever dreamed of owning. The air, devoid of dust, smelled faintly of fresh wood and possibility. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her. Anger battled with a dangerous, insidious pull of gratitude. He had taken her freedom, but given her a sanctuary for her art. Was this a trick? Another way to control her? To exploit her talent for his own ends? Her mind screamed yes, but her artist heart, starved for so long, yearned for the touch of a brush on a fresh canvas. She spent the next few days in a strange, uneasy limbo. She tried to refuse food, only for a gourmet meal to appear, untouched, then replaced with fresh fare hours later. She tried to avoid Dante, but he seemed to materialize, a silent, imposing shadow, always observing. He didn't engage in small talk, rarely smiled. Yet, there were moments, subtle and unsettling, that chipped away at her resolve. One evening, she was sketching furiously in her new studio, trying to capture the raw, untamed city lights outside, when her charcoal snapped. She cursed softly. Moments later, a servant appeared, silently placing a fresh box of charcoals of every grade on her table, then vanishing. Another time she mentioned, almost to herself, that the north light in the studio was perfect. The next morning, a sophisticated silent mechanism had been installed, allowing a precise control of the natural light, mimicking exactly what she had mused about. Dante himself never overtly cared. He observed. He anticipated. He provided. One afternoon, finding her huddled in a blanket on the balcony, staring blankly at the cityscape, he simply placed a steaming mug of herbal tea next to her, then retreated without a word. The tea was warm, soothing, and exactly what she hadn't realized she needed. These small, unsolicited acts of consideration were a far more insidious form of control than outright cruelty. They confused her, blurring the lines between captor and protector, between prison and refuge. She hated him for taking her freedom. She resented his absolute power. Yet a sliver of her, raw, vulnerable part, found a strange, precarious safety in his impenetrable presence. He was a dangerous man, a king of shadows, but within his gilded walls, no one else could touch her. Thorn was gone, his threat evaporated. But Dante Volkov remained, an enigma, a formidable force that promised protection as fiercely as he wielded control. One evening, as she worked late into the night in her studio, lost in the rhythm of her brush, the door creaked open. Dante stood there, silhouetted against the softer lights of the penthouse, watching her. He didn't move, didn't speak. But his gaze, usually so unreadable, held a depth she hadn't seen before, a silent, intense appreciation for her art, and something else, something possessive, yes, but also almost tender. It was a look that sent a shiver down her spine, not entirely of fear. He was seeing her, truly seeing the artist within. And for the first time in this gilded cage, Maya wondered if this dark, dangerous man was seeing something in her that no one else ever had, and what he would do to keep it. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air, a precursor to the storms yet to come. Weeks blurred into a strange, unsettling rhythm within Dante's penthouse. Maya painted, she sketched. She poured her restless energy into canvases that screamed of both confinement and defiance. The studio, magnificent and boundless, was her only true escape, a mental sanctuary where brushes danced with color, momentarily silencing the suffocating hum of control. Yet, even as her art flourished, a gnawing unease persisted. The luxury was absolute, the service impeccable, but every gilded surface, every soundless hallway, served as a stark reminder of her captivity. Dante was a spectral presence. He rarely intruded on her studio time, but Maya could feel his eyes on her, a persistent, invisible weight. She'd catch him in the periphery of her vision, standing at the edge of the living room, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, watching her sketch. Or in the dining room, presiding over lavish meals she barely touched, his gaze unwavering as she pushed food around her plate. He never commented on her art directly, but the daily delivery of increasingly rare pigments, specialty canvases, and esoteric art history texts, often accompanied by a single, carefully chosen flower, spoke volumes. It was an insidious form of care, a silent acknowledgement of her deepest desires, even as he denied her most fundamental right. Her analytical mind, honed by years of studying brushstrokes and art history, began to piece together the fragments. He knew her favorite obscure painters. He anticipated her need for a specific type of linen canvas before she even voiced it. He seemed to understand the silent language of her artistic soul. This wasn't merely the result of careful observation in the penthouse. This was prior knowledge. He had known about her long before the champagne incident, long before Thorne had sprung his trap. The realization settled heavy in her stomach, a cold, hard stone of suspicion. One evening, after another silent, watchful dinner, Maya found herself unable to contain the question that had been festering. She followed Dante to the observation deck, where the city lights glittered like scattered diamonds below. The air, cool and crisp, did little to soothe the fire building within her. "You knew," she stated, her voice trembling slightly but firm. She clutched the railing, her knuckles white. "At the auction. Before. You knew about my father. About Thorne. About me." Dante turned, his silhouette stark against the luminous skyline. His face, usually an unreadable mask, held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher, a hint of weary acceptance, perhaps. He took a slow breath, the scent of cedar and expensive cologne washing over her. "Yes," he admitted, his voice a low rumble. "I knew." He paused, allowing the weight of the confession to settle between them. "Your father, Elias Vance, was more than just a reckless art dealer, Maya. He dabbled in sensitive acquisitions for certain parties. His knowledge, his network was vast and dangerous." Maya stared, dumbfounded. "My father. He was a charming rogue, yes, but dangerous? What are you talking about?" Elias had a unique talent for identifying not just artistic genius, but also the hidden provenance, the true, often illicit history of certain pieces. Dante explained, his gaze distant, as if reliving old memories. He often served as an intermediary, a broker of secrets, for clients who preferred their transactions kept in the shadows. He collected not just art, but also favors and enemies. Powerful enemies. A chill went through Maya. "And I inherited that. Your lineage, yes. More importantly, your talent." Dante turned fully to her, his eyes piercing. "Your father possessed a singular artistic sensitivity, a bloodline ability to not only restore, but to understand and even replicate the techniques of masters. It's what made him valuable to the cartels, the collectors who wanted perfectly forged works without risk." "Cartels." Maya whispered, the words sounding alien and terrifying. "Precisely. And that unique artistic DNA, Maya, runs in your veins. Your meticulous restoration of Whisper of Elysium was proof. It wasn't just a painting, it was a key. A key to your father's legacy and a target on your back. Dante stepped closer, his presence commanding. Thorn was merely one of many who recognized your value, your potential. He intended to exploit you for his own ends, to use your talent to produce his forgeries. Others, even more ruthless, would have done far worse. The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. Her father, the man she adored, a charming rogue, was entangled in a world of crime and danger she couldn't comprehend. And she, unknowingly, was caught in its crosshairs. Her initial anger at Dante's deception began to wane, replaced by a dawning, terrifying understanding. He hadn't just claimed her, he had intervened. He hadn't just trapped her, he had protected her from a fate she couldn't have escaped on her own. The gilded cage now seemed less like a prison and more like a fortress. Her newfound, reluctant acceptance was quickly put to the test. A few days later, a strange package arrived. Addressed to M. Vance, it contained a single, wilted black rose and a small, antique silver locket. No. It was subtly sinister, a message that slipped past the pristine security. Maya, unnerved, brought it to Dante. Dante examined the package with a detached, clinical precision. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he opened the locket, revealing a faded, miniature portrait of a man Maya vaguely recognized as an associate of her father's, a man who had vanished years ago. He pressed a hidden catch, and a tiny, almost invisible piece of paper unfolded, displaying a single cryptic symbol. Dante's eyes, usually so unreadable, narrowed. A sudden, cold fury settled over him, palpable and chilling. He made a single terse phone call in hushed Italian, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He gave precise, ruthless instructions, his words clipped and sharp as broken glass. Maya couldn't understand the language, but the intent was unmistakable. Eliminate the threat. Swiftly, painlessly for her, painfully for them. He ended the call, his hands still clenching the phone, his knuckles white. Maya watched him, a strange fascination battling with fear. He was formidable, terrifying in his cold efficiency. Then he turned to her, his gaze intense. A minor annoyance, he stated, his voice now calm, but still laced with an underlying steel. An old contact of your father's. A foolish man who believed he could gain leverage through you. He tossed the wilted rose into a nearby waste bin with dismissive disdain. But as he turned away, striding back towards the city view, Maya saw it. A momentary falter in his otherwise unyielding composure. A flicker, barely a breath, in the depths of his steel-gray eyes, a flash of raw, almost primal fear. Not for himself, but for her. The thought of her vulnerability, of the danger that had breached his fortress, had shaken him. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but Maya had seen it. The powerful, terrifying Mafia boss, the shadow broker, the man who claimed her, was not immune to fear. He feared losing her. The revelation was a tectonic shift in her understanding. He was still her captor, still controlled her every move, but he was also, irrevocably, her most potent, most dangerous protector. The anger hadn't vanished, but was now laced with a profound, unsettling curiosity. What other secrets did he hold? What other layers of his formidable, enigmatic self would he eventually unravel? And how much of her destiny was truly intertwined with his? The answers, she knew, would lead her deeper into his world, a world where the lines between love and possession, freedom and safety, were inextricably blurred. The uneasy truce Maya had forged with her gilded cage was brittle, prone to shattering with every silent passing guard, every watchful gaze from Dante. She painted furiously, creating a new series of works that channeled her conflicting emotions, vibrant colors trapped within stark, angular lines. She understood, intellectually, the dark logic of Dante's protection, the tangled web of her father's past that made her a prize, a target. But the gnawing absence of true autonomy, the phantom touch of change she couldn't see, began to wear at her soul. The fragile piece shattered with a single, cryptic message. It arrived not through the pristine, controlled channels of Dante's penthouse, but through a forgotten corner of her old life. Among a delivery of specialized, imported canvases, ordered for her by Dante, of course, Maya found small, discreetly folded paper tucked beneath the protective wrapping. It wasn't on expensive stationery, but a crumpled, familiar napkin from her old diner. Scrawled on it in shaky handwriting were 3 words: Maya, help, bar, Below it, a familiar, hastily drawn symbol, a small, stylized bird, Maya and her childhood friend Lena used to draw as a secret code for distress. Lena, her best friend from the struggling artist community, a barista with a heart of gold and a fiery spirit. Lena, who believed in Maya's talent even when Maya herself didn't. Lena, who was now in trouble. A cold wave of dread washed over Maya, instantly eclipsing the penthouse's warmth. This wasn't Dante's world. This was her world, bleeding into his and threatening the only true connection she still had. Panic, sharp and visceral, clawed at her throat. She gripped the napkin, its cheap paper a stark contrast to the luxurious confines. Should she tell Dante? The thought flickered, then died. His protection was absolute, yes, but it was also ruthless. He had dismantled Thorn with brutal efficiency. If Lena was involved with any remnants of Thorn, or worse, with another faction of the underworld, Dante's solution would be swift, permanent, and likely devastating to Lena. Maya couldn't risk it. Lena was innocent, caught in the crossfire of a war that wasn't hers. Maya had to save her, the way she herself had been saved, but on her terms. The determination solidified into a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She would act. She had observed the changing shifts of Dante's guards, the patterns of the cleaning staff. She knew the service elevator, the discreet back entrance where deliveries were made. This cage, however gilded, had seams. That night, as the penthouse settled into its deep, watchful silence, Maya made her move. Dressed in a simple, dark hoodie and jeans she'd found in one of the guest closets, starkly out of place amidst the designer wear, she moved like a ghost. The polished marble felt cold beneath her sneakers, a stark contrast to the plush carpets she usually tread. Every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every creak of the ancient building's foundation sounded like a warning. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and exhilarating defiance. She managed to slip past a sleepy guard, her breath catching in her throat, and found the service elevator. The descent was agonizingly slow, each floor a ticking second towards either freedom or disaster. When the doors finally opened to the grimy loading dock, the rush of cold, damp night air hit her face like a slap. It smelled of exhaust fumes, stale garbage, and the raw, untamed city, a smell she hadn't realized she missed, a scent of dangerous, exhilarating possibility. She hailed a cab, her voice husky as she gave Lena's old bar address. The bar was a dive, loud and smoky, a stark contrast to Dante's sterile opulence. Lena, her eyes wide with fear, pulled Maya into a dark booth. Her story tumbled out in a frantic whisper. Thorn's remnants, or perhaps a new, aggressive player trying to gain a foothold after Thorn's downfall, had been harassing her, demanding information about Maya, threatening her livelihood, her safety. They wanted to use Lena to lure Maya, believing her to be Thorn's artist, a valuable asset now in limbo. They thought Maya still held crucial information about Thorn's network. They said they'd make me disappear if I didn't get you to talk. Lena sobbed, her hand clutching Maya's arm. I don't know anything, Maya, I swear. I just know they're dangerous. They mentioned a meeting tomorrow night. They want you there. At the old warehouse. Maya's blood ran cold. The old warehouse. It was a known haunt for illicit dealings, a place where people vanished. This wasn't just a threat to Lena. It was a trap for Maya. A trap designed to drag her back into the very underworld Dante had pulled her from. The thought of bringing Dante into this, of unleashing his destructive force on Lena's fragile world, twisted her gut. She had to handle this herself. She had to protect Lena. As she made her way back towards the penthouse, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of vulnerability and isolation. The city, once a symbol of her independence, now felt vast and uncaring. She found her way back to the loading dock, her body aching with the unfamiliar cold, her heart heavy with the weight of Lena's fear. But as she reached the service entrance, a figure stepped out of the shadows, a dark, imposing silhouette. Don. His face was a mask of furious, controlled calm, his steel-gray eyes burning with an intensity that made her flinch. Where have you been, Maya? His voice was a low growl, devoid of his usual detached composure, laced with an anger that vibrated with suppressed violence. Maya's defiance, already fragile, snapped. I was helping a friend. A real friend, Dante, not someone you acquired. You can't keep me locked up like this. I'm not a prisoner. She shoved past him, her chest heaving, the sense of betrayal overwhelming. He had promised safety, but it felt like suffocating control. She had escaped one monster only to be caged by another. Dante caught her arm, his grip firm, unyielding. You disobeyed me. You put yourself in danger. You have no idea what you've just walked into. The anger was clear in his voice, but beneath it, a chilling tremor of fear. I know I walked out of your cage, she retorted, tears stinging her eyes. You say you protect me, but you just control me. I can't live like this, Dante. I'd rather take my chances with them than be your trophy. She twisted, trying to pull free, the desperate need for true freedom consuming her. Dante's eyes hardened, a dangerous glint replacing the fear. You think you want freedom, little artist, he murmured, his voice now dangerously soft, but you have no idea what it truly costs. You just sealed your fate. Again. His words, cold and cutting, struck her like a whip. She looked at him, truly seeing the ruthless, uncompromising power he embodied. The protection had felt like a comfort, but now it felt like an unbreakable chain. She had thought she was taking control, but she had only succeeded in alienating the only man who could truly shield her. As he pulled her back towards the elevator, the cold dread returned, thicker and more terrifying than before. She had escaped his watchful eye, but had she truly escaped the web? Or had she merely stepped out of his fortress, directly into the jaws of a far more brutal predator? The answer, she feared, would reveal itself at the old warehouse, and this time she might not have a choice in who came to claim her. The air in the abandoned warehouse was a noxious cocktail of stale dust, industrial decay, and the metallic tang of fear. Maya's hands, bound roughly behind her back, were already chafing raw against the coarse rope. Her mouth was gagged, the rough fabric scratching at her tongue, tasting of desperation. She was tied to a rickety metal chair in the center of a cavernous, dimly lit space, surrounded by shadows that danced with the flickering light of a single, bare bulb. The cold concrete floor seeped through her jeans, chilling her to the bone, a stark contrast to the pampered luxury she had so recently and foolishly rejected. They were not Thorne's men. These were new faces, harder, colder, bearing the insignia of the Valenti crime family, a name Dante had once mentioned with a dismissive wave, a minor faction he had dealt with years ago. They thought they saw an opening, a weakness in Dante's recent consolidation of power. And Maya, the artist of Vance, with her leverage. A man, scarred across one eye, leaned close, his breath reeking of stale cigarettes. He spoke in guttural Italian, interspersed with broken English. The great Volkov thinks he can take everything. We show him what he loses. We take his prize. He laughed, a chilling, grating sound. Maya squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back the rising tide of bile. They wanted information, yes, but their eyes held something far more sinister, a predatory hunger that promised more than mere interrogation. They intended to break her, to send a message to Dante etched in her very being. Her mind raced, a frantic hamster on a wheel. This was my fault. My stupid, reckless attempt at freedom. Was Lena safe? Had they followed me? The shame burned, hot and acrid, beneath the suffocating fear. She had defied Dante, had spat in the face of his protection, and now she was paying the ultimate price. She imagined his cold fury, the chilling satisfaction of, I told you so. But even in her terror, a desperate plea formed. Dante, please. I was wrong. Suddenly, the heavy metal door at the far end of the warehouse splintered inward with a deafening crash, ripped from its hinges as if by an invisible, monstrous hand. The flimsy bulb above flickered, then died, plunging the warehouse into near-total darkness, pierced only by the faint, grimy light from high windows. Then came the chaos. A cacophony of shouts, screams, and the terrifying thud-thud-thud of rapid-fire gunshots ripped through the silence. It wasn't a skirmish. It was an onslaught, brutal and precise. Maya flinched, the chair rattling violently. She could hear the sickening impact of bodies, the choked cries of men, the shattering of glass. The smell of gunpowder, sharp and acrid, filled the air, mingling with the stench of fear and rust. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying for it to end, her body trembling uncontrollably. She could hear the close-quarter combat, the sickening crunch of bone, the wet, desperate sounds of men fighting for their lives and losing. It was a symphony of destruction, utterly merciless, brutally efficient. Through the gaps in her gag, a low, guttural roar echoed, a sound more animal than human, filled with pure, unadulterated rage. It was Dante. He moved through the maelstrom of violence like a blade through water, a dark, terrifying force of nature. Maya's eyes snapped open, wide with horror and a strange, desperate hope. In the fleeting glimpses of moonlight that cut through the warehouse grime, she saw him. Not the impeccably tailored art broker, but the unhinged king of shadows, draped in fury. His suit was dark, his movements fluid, deadly. He wielded a pistol with a terrifying, almost casual expertise, each shot precise, final. His men, equally ruthless, swept through the warehouse, securing the perimeter, eliminating any resistance with chilling efficiency. One of Valenti's men, the scarred one, tried to grab Maya, a desperate attempt at a shield. His hand, heavy and rough, clamped over her arm, yanking the chair. But he barely had time to move before a shadow fell over them, Dante. He stood over them, his eyes burning with an inferno of rage, fixed not on the cowering man, but on Maya, on the ropes that bound her, on the gag that silenced her. The scarred man snarled, reaching for a knife. But Dante was faster. He didn't even draw his own weapon this time. With a single, devastatingly swift motion, he disarmed the man, twisting his arm with a sickening crack, then slamming his head against the concrete with a brutal, final thud. It was a display of raw, unrestrained violence that stole Maya's breath, leaving her both terrified and undeniably safe. He knelt before her, his large frame radiating heat and fury, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The scent of gunpowder, blood, and his own distinctive cedar cologne filled her senses. His hands, usually so controlled, trembled slightly as he ripped the gag from her mouth, then swiftly cut the ropes binding her wrists. The sudden release sent a searing pain through her numb limbs, but was overshadowed by the sheer relief, the rush of air to her lungs. Maya, he rasped, his voice raw, guttural, vibrating with a primal intensity she had never heard. It was a roar of pain, of fury, of profound, unadulterated relief. Are you hurt? His hands, surprisingly gentle, cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away the tracks of tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. He tilted her chin, his gaze sweeping over her, searching for any sign of injury. She could only shake her head, choked by sobs, her voice a fragile, broken whisper. Dante. I thought. Never, he interrupted fiercely, his eyes blazing, locking onto hers. Do you understand me? Never. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest, the solid warmth of his body a stark contrast to the cold fear that had enveloped her moments before. His embrace was possessive, bruising, desperate. I would tear this city apart, stone by stone, before I let them keep you. His voice was a guttural vow, etched in the echoes of the violence that still hung heavy in the air. Maya clung to him, trembling, burying her face in the expensive fabric of his suit, now stained with grime and a splattering of blood that she refused to acknowledge. The sheer relief, the overwhelming certainty of his presence, broke through her terror. She had pushed him away, had defied him, had cursed his control, and yet he had come. He had unleashed hell, simply to retrieve her. It was terrifying, intoxicating, and undeniably real. His lips found her hair, then her temple, pressing desperate, almost frantic kisses. Mine, he whispered fiercely, the word a brand, a promise, a claim. Always mine. When he finally pulled back, just enough to look into her eyes, they were swollen raw, but shining with something beyond just fear. His face, usually so composed, was strained, etched with a primal fear she had glimpsed once before. He had been truly terrified. For her. You're insane, she whispered, her voice husky, still shaking. He let out a harsh, broken laugh, a sound devoid of humor. Then I'll die insane, he growled, his eyes never leaving hers. But I'll die with your name on my lips, knowing you are safe. He lifted her into his arms, effortlessly, cradling her against him as if she weighed nothing. He stepped over the crumpled bodies of men who had dared to touch what was his gaze fixed only on her survival. His men, silent and efficient, had cleared a path. As Dante carried her out of the blood-stained warehouse, leaving the carnage behind, Maya buried her face in his neck, the scent of him, of cedar and smoke and something uniquely dangerous, filling her lungs. She was safe, saved, and utterly, completely, irrevocably claimed. The night air, cool and sharp, hit her face as he carried her towards a waiting black car. She was still trembling, still reeling from the violence, but in his arms, against the frantic beating of his heart, she felt an undeniable, almost addictive sense of safety. He was a monster, yes, but he was her monster. and the world outside his formidable embrace now seemed far more terrifying than any cage he might build. The echoes of his fury, the ruthlessness of his rescue, solidified a terrifying truth. She was now a part of his world, bound to him by blood, fear, and a terrifying, unyielding devotion. What would happen now, she wondered, as he gently placed her in the back of the car, was no longer up to her. It was entirely up to him. And that, in itself, was perhaps the most terrifying, yet strangely comforting truth of all. The black armored car, a fortress on wheels, glided silently back towards Dante's penthouse, leaving the stench of gunpowder and the lingering echoes of violence behind. Maya huddled against the plush leather seat, her body still trembling uncontrollably, a raw ache blooming in her wrists where the ropes had bitten deep. Her throat was raw from choked sobs and the rough gag. Each tremor that racked her frame was a vivid echo of the warehouse, of the terrifying faces, of Dante's brutal, beautiful fury. She was safe, undeniably, but the fear had etched itself onto her bones, a cold, persistent phantom. Dante sat across from her, his presence a dark, immovable force. His suit was no longer pristine. A dark smear of blood, not his own, stained his sleeve, and his jaw was set, taut with an exhaustion and a simmering rage that still simmered beneath his controlled exterior. He didn't speak, didn't touch her, but his eyes, those intense steel-gray pools, never left her face. They devoured every nuance of her distress, every flicker of fear in her wide, haunted eyes. It was a gaze of absolute possession, yes, but now Maya saw something else within them, a profound, terrifying fear that mirrored her own. When they finally arrived at the penthouse, the silence of the marble halls was a jarring contrast to the inferno they had just escaped. A team of medics, discreet and efficient, was already waiting. Dante, with a single curt nod, dismissed his men, then gently, but firmly, guided Maya to a private, luxurious medical suite. He watched, a silent sentinel, as the medics cleaned her superficial wounds, disinfected the angry rope burns on her wrists, and offered a mild sedative. She refused the sedative, her mind still too frantic, too raw, to allow herself the oblivion of sleep. Once the medics had quietly retreated, leaving behind the sterile scent of antiseptic, Dante approached her. Maya sat rigidly on the edge of the crisp white bed, her gaze fixed on her bandaged wrists, a visceral reminder of her folly. He sat beside her, the mattress dipping slightly under his weight, his presence almost overwhelming in the quiet room. His hand, warm and firm, reached for her bandaged wrist, his thumb gently stroking the soft cotton. It wasn't a demanding touch, but one filled with an unspoken tenderness, a stark contrast to the ruthless power he had wielded just hours before. "You were reckless," he said, his voice a low growl, but devoid of anger. It was an accusation, yes, but laced with a vulnerability that startled her. "You risked everything. For a friend." Maya flinched. She needed help. "I couldn't just abandon her." Her voice was hoarse, still shaky. "And you locked me up, Dante. I felt suffocated. I thought I could fix it myself." He sighed, a deep, weary sound that resonated through her. His grip on her wrist tightened almost imperceptibly. "You have no idea, little artist, what you walked into tonight. The Lindy, they are scavengers. They would have used you, broken you, sold you to the highest bidder, just to send a message. A message carved into your skin." His voice was raw, laced with a chilling certainty. "I warned you. This world, it doesn't forgive innocence. It consumes it." Maya shivered, the cold truth of his words piercing through her bruised defiance. She remembered the scarred man's eyes, the casual cruelty in their depths. She had been naive, foolishly believing her small acts of defiance could navigate a world built on blood and power. Dante rose, moving to the massive glass window overlooking the city, his back to her. "My men are already dismantling their operations. Every asset, every associate, every piece of filth who dare to touch what is mine will pay. A price far greater than any debt." His voice was cold, lethal, the ruthless kingpin reasserting his domain. Maya knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that his words were not empty threats. The retribution would be swift, absolute, and utterly merciless. He was protecting her, yes, but he was also terrifyingly dangerous. Then he turned, his face etched with a raw emotion she hadn't dared to hope to see. "When I realized you were gone, when my security alerted me to your breach." His voice faltered, a rare, almost imperceptible tremor. I thought I had lost you." His eyes, usually so controlled, were haunted. That fear, Maya, it was unlike any I have ever known. Not of enemies, not of war, but of your absence. He walked back to her, slowly, deliberately. He knelt before her, his large frame humbled, his eyes pleading. He took both her hands in his thumbs gently tracing the raw edges of her bandages. When I told you I claimed you, when I brought you here, to this gilded cage, it was not just for control, Maya. It was because I knew, with every fiber of my being, that it was the only way to keep you alive. To protect that fire, that talent, that precious spirit that shines so brightly. He squeezed her hands, his gaze locking onto hers, fierce and unyielding. I cannot live with your hatred, Maya, but I cannot live without you. And if keeping you safe means you hate me, then I will bear that burden. His confession, stripped bare of arrogance and pretense, struck her with the force of a revelation. It wasn't just control. It was an obsession, yes, but one born from a profound, terrifying fear of loss. His possessiveness, so suffocating before, now seemed like a desperate, fierce form of love. He was a monster, but a monster whose ferocity was entirely directed at keeping her safe. The lines blurred, twisted, until she could no longer separate the captor from the protector, the prison from the sanctuary. A hesitant, fragile tenderness bloomed in her chest, pushing past the pain and the lingering fear. She looked at his face, scarred by the shadows of his world, etched with a desperate, raw devotion. He had faced hell, had unleashed his own personal inferno for her. He hadn't just saved her from Thorn, he had saved her from the abyss. Slowly, carefully, Maya reached out her uninjured hand, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against his strong, stubbled jaw. His eyes, dark and intense, watched her every move. You were right, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I was foolish and terrified. Her gaze met his, no longer defiant, but accepting. And I realize now that your cage is also my shield. A flicker of profound relief, of something akin to victory, crossed Dante's face. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a brief, vulnerable moment. When they opened again, they were still fierce, still possessive, but now a deep, resonant warmth had entered their depths. He brought her hands to his lips, pressing a soft, reverent kiss to her bandaged wrists, a silent promise of care. You are mine, Maya, he reaffirmed, his voice low and solemn, no longer a demand, but a shared truth. And I will burn the world to keep you safe. Maya felt a profound shift within her. The anger, the resentment, had not completely vanished, but they were now overshadowed by a nascent, dangerous love, a fierce sense of belonging. She was still scarred, but undeniably safe. And in Dante's formidable, terrifying embrace, she found a strange, undeniable peace. Her world had irrevocably changed, and she was no longer alone. She was claimed, and perhaps for the first time, truly, terrifyingly wanted. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for now, in the quiet aftermath, she allowed herself to lean into the fierce, possessive strength of the man who had risked everything to bring her home. Months flowed into a tranquil year, painting a new landscape over the scars of the past. The New York skyline, once a symbol of Maya's unreachable freedom, now shimmered beyond the panoramic glass walls of Dante's penthouse like a sprawling, breathtaking masterpiece that belonged to her too. Her studio, once a lavish prison, had become her sanctuary, a vibrant testament to a talent unleashed. Canvases filled the space, alive with bold colors and intricate details, each stroke telling a story of transformation. She painted not just the city's light, but its shadows, its secrets, finding beauty in the dangerous complexities she now understood and accepted as her world. Maya no longer felt like a caged bird. She moved through the opulent rooms with a quiet confidence, the silk dresses Dante chose for her now feeling like a second skin, a regal mantle rather than a costume. The guards, ever present, were no longer bars, but discreet extensions of Dante's omnipresent protection, walls built to keep threats out, not to keep her in. She had found her own kind of freedom, a profound autonomy born not of escape, but of acceptance and a fierce, undeniable belonging. The most profound change, however, was in the quiet flutter beneath her heart. Weeks ago, a familiar wave of nausea, a sudden craving for obscure fruits, had confirmed the joyous, terrifying truth. She was pregnant. A child. Their child. For a moment, the old fears resurfaced, the violence of Dante's world, the shadows that lurked. But then she remembered his eyes in the warehouse, raw with terror at the thought of losing her. She remembered his desperate confession, his vow to bear her hatred if it meant keeping her safe. This child would be protected with a ferocity she now understood, a love as absolute and unwavering as the man who commanded her world. When she told Dante, she found him in his private study, silhouetted against the dark wood of his desk, the glow of a single lamp illuminating the sharp planes of his face as he reviewed documents. She walked to him, heart pounding a different rhythm now, one of anticipation, not fear. He looked up, his steel-gray eyes softening almost imperceptibly as they met hers. "Dante," she began, her voice a soft whisper that carried immense weight. She placed his hand on her stomach, already a subtle curve. "We're going to have a baby." For the first time since she had known him, Dante Volkov looked utterly, completely undone. The documents slipped from his grasp, scattering silently onto the rich rug. He sank to his knees before her, his strong hands, usually so accustomed to wielding power, now trembling as they pressed against her stomach. His forehead rested against her, a silent, profound reverence in his posture. "A child," he murmured, his voice husky, raw with emotion. "Our child." He looked up, his eyes brimming with a depth of vulnerability she had rarely witnessed. "I swear to you, Maya," he whispered, his voice cracking with intensity, "I will protect you both. With everything I am. With every breath in my body. No shadow will touch you. No enemy will reach you." Maya's fingers slid into his dark, silken hair, her smile trembling, but steady. "I don't need you to be invincible, Dante," she said softly, her heart overflowing. "I just need you to be here. With us." That night, she lay curled in his arms, the city lights a distant, comforting hum beyond their window. His lips brushed her hair, his presence a warm, unyielding anchor. Their futures, once intertwined by lies and force, were now bound by something far more potent: fire, surrender, and the profound, undeniable promise of new life. For the first time, neither of them yearned to run. The seasons shifted again. Autumn painted the trees beyond the Hudson estate in fiery hues of amber and gold. Maya walked through the sprawling gardens, her hand resting gently on the beautiful curve of her stomach, life fluttering softly within her. She paused beneath an old oak, its leaves drifting down around her like golden wishes. The invisible girl who once worked double shifts now carried the heir to one of America's most feared empires. And yet she felt like the beginning of something new, not a pawn, but a queen in her own right, shaping a destiny she had chosen. From the terrace, Dante watched her. His victories had always been measured in territory, in fear, in silence bought with blood. Now he measured them in moments, the sound of Maya's soft laughter reaching him across the garden, the instinctive way her hand cradled their unborn child. When she turned and caught his gaze, he felt that familiar sharp ache in his chest, a poignant reminder of how he had first found her, a gift he had stolen, and for which he would spend the rest of his life fighting to deserve. He descended the steps, crossing the lawn with the steady stride of a man feared by enemies, but irrevocably softened by a love he could no longer deny. "You're watching me again," Maya teased, her smile tugging at the corners of her lips as he reached her. "Always," he admitted simply, his hands sliding to rest over hers on her stomach, proprietary yet tender gesture. "I can't stop." She rolled her eyes, but her voice was gentle, filled with an abiding affection. "You don't have to hold me so tightly anymore, Dante. I'm not running." His gaze darkened, not with the old hunger for control, but with reverence, with a "no," he said, his voice a low, fierce vow. "But I'll never stop holding on." They stood there as the autumn leaves drifted around them, the empire quiet for once, the war silenced by a fragile, profound peace. Maya leaned into him, letting his arm anchor her. For the first time, she didn't feel caged. She felt chosen. And Dante, the man who had claimed her through cunning and force, now whispered the only vow that truly mattered. "Whatever comes, Maya, you and our child will always be my world. I'll burn everything else before I let anyone take you from me." She looked up at him, her eyes steady, her heart no longer torn between resentment and surrender. "I don't need the world, Dante," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "I just need you. And our masterpiece." His lips brushed hers, not fierce, not desperate, but certain. A kiss of promise, of forever. The wind stirred the last of the autumn leaves, carrying them across the magnificent estate. And for once, Maya didn't wonder what freedom might feel like beyond the gates. Because freedom was here, in his arms, in a life growing inside her, in the shared empire they would build together, a future born not of lies, but of a dark, undeniable, and utterly consuming love. Sometimes, Absolute humiliation leads to undeniable belonging. Maya's story proves your past never defines your worth. Her dark, possessive love, initially a trap, became her fierce shield. It transformed captivity into a profound home. If this tale of resilience and devotion resonated, like this video, subscribe, and comment. My worth endures to affirm your strength. Find power in our community.